She has served as the Director of Community and Public Programs at the Bronx Museum, Director of Performing and Visual Arts at the Casita Maria Center for Arts and Education, also as the Associate Director of Visual Arts at the Boston Center for the Arts. She has also been an active art writer and critic, published in numerous exhibition and artist catalogs, as well as written for Artlog, Degree Critical, Performa, and Art on Paper. She has a BFA from Parsons, the New School for Design, and an MFA in Art Criticism and Writing from the School of Visual Arts. And Miss Jasmine Murrell is a New York-based interdisciplinary artist born in Detroit, Michigan. She has her BFA from Parsons School of Design and an MFA from Hunter. And her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally for the past decades in venues such as the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, the Bronx Museum, the African American Museum of Art, and the Whitney. Her work has been published in Artform, the New York Times, the Amsterdam News, Metro Times, and Hyperallergic, just to name a few. Please welcome them.
Thank you so much, really, both of you. Thank you so much for having me here. This is a real joy for me. I feel really lucky and honored to be with Jasmine. We met at Casita Maria. She was the first show I did there and really changed my curatorial practice, because when you work with Jasmine, everything changes. Everything gets reset in the most beautiful and positive way. I say that. I don't say that as like, oh, what a challenge. It was a joy. Like, I kept having all these doors opened and my mind opened, and it was just this incredible experience. So with that, I'm going to have a little bit of a disclaimer. If I can talk about Jasmine's work from now until next year, but we want to hear from Jasmine. So if at any point I have gone on too long, I have some built-in support from here, which is, if I've gone on too long, silent snoring. You can also be like, you know, you can just be like, no more. The reason why I'm being humorous is not because I don't take this work seriously. I take it very seriously, and like I've said, it's changed my practice. But artist talks are very rare things. As a writer, to get into the artist's mind is one of the greatest gifts you can ever get. I want people to feel welcome. I want them to feel like they have a part in this. I want Jasmine to feel relaxed, because to have her voice, and not because she's not a relaxed person, she's one of the most relaxed, easy, I don't know, Detroit, her, they're so relaxed. But it should be about communicating and learning, because these are the rare moments we only get a couple of times in a lifetime. So that's why I say that, not because I don't take it seriously. I do, I take it very seriously, but I want everyone to feel comfortable. So if I go on too long, snore it up. We're here for you.
But I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming out on this cold day, and especially the director, Melanie, and Michi, and for all of your love and support during the exhibition. It's a gift to have any kind of support. I'm really grateful. Thank you, Christine, for coming out today in the midst of, you know, running an organization. And yes, thank you for all your love and support. It's really much appreciated.
And so mutual.
Yeah.
So with that, you know, I've worked with Jasmine for many years. I've written a lot about her work. So I would like to also give everyone here a little bit of opportunity to get some background. You know, one of the most beautiful things I think about this show is the depiction of mature women, of sometimes even our elders, in such beautiful ways, in ways that we don't get to see, in ways that are often ignored by society. So I just wanted to, this was something new I learned from talking about specifically this show, is that I didn't realize, I knew this was a part of your work for a long time, the women that you photographed, and I wanted to ask you, like, when did it start, and what is the relationship that you have with the women that you photographed, like, for example, right here?
Right.
Here.
Well, first off, before, I would say, many of the women that are in the show, I've been working with them for maybe most of my life. And so, like Nefra, for instance, she was actually in Detroit. I was really influenced from the theater. and she was one of the actresses, and she was also a seamstress, and she was one of the people that made me feel really comfortable being in my skin and being fully expressive. So she helped me to actually make a lot of, people would say costumes, but I don't look at them as costumes. She just helped me to make clothing that I felt like that I needed to wear, that I couldn't buy. And so that kind of began as a child. And then slowly, it wasn't something, it's really quite interesting because I didn't necessarily, I started off basically going from fashion when I went to art school. My first job was actually in a theater company, like so.
That I didn't know.
Yes, actually, my first job was actually creating costumes in a theater. And I was very introverted, and I loved to be around people that were completely opposite of me, like very extroverted and just doing experimental things. And in Detroit at the time, it was a booming kind of space for just so many things. Ron Allen doing theater, doing shows on just kind of different things that, how can I describe it? Very avant-garde theater, and I felt it was a very just a magical time with just artists that were just inventing spaces, creating spaces in their homes, doing projects in theater, outside of the theater. And so that's where I met Nefra. She was not blood, but her spirit, her energy really inspired me. And so I began working with her when I was young, and then when I went to college to study art, I first started with painting. Then I went from painting to sculpture to interdisciplinary studies, but photography was basically the thread that was consistent throughout my work. It was a way for me to document projects. It was also a way for me to take photographs of things that I was interested in, photographing. And I didn't necessarily, I was just really, this is kind of personal, but I didn't really grow up, like my home, we didn't have television. Like, we made a lot of things, so my parents were very particular about, for me to see certain things, and maybe that changed, but I was really drawn to the kind of things that you would experience, these intimate spaces between your elders, your older people, in a private space. And that was really beautiful, that I didn't see those representations in other printed matter or magazine or historically. They were completely another kind of narrative. And so when I was working with Nefra and a few other women, yes, this is Nefra, at that particular time, I think I was started off with painting, and it was difficult. I got a lot of criticism, basically, from all different spaces, of why would you paint your grandmother this way in a bathing suit and nude, or not nude, you're just in the bathing suit. Why would you,
Why that subject?
Right, or just disrespectful. They felt like it was like disrespectful to show a mature person in a bathing suit, or something that is like seemingly sensual, or something that could be thought of to be sensual, to be sexual, and it wasn't sexual at all. And so from that kind of point of view, I wasn't necessarily thinking of the work to be something talking about ageism, to be honest. I never do, and I actually photographed all different types of people from different parts of the world, and I worked on projects, different types, but I was really particularly interested in miracles, basically. And I just thought,
I love this word. I love when you use miracles.
because there's no really other way to describe it.
Word.
And I was just drawn to particular people that I felt like they were just kind of like what I would imagine. Like some people want to paint the president. Like I want to paint Nefra, because I just saw them as these kind of monumental kind of beings that were not only depicted in printed matter of like jet and ebony, or published magazines, but I just even felt even within my community, there was this type of untalked about, kind of recognized power, that they embodied. And they were also kind of these kind of invisible hands that were a part of making things incredible. And like, for instance, the March on Washington, those were created from a group of women, in the church. But, just this kind of erasure that was constant in history. And, Paula Getty's When and Where I Enter, she talks about it. It's just, it's just the whole history of this kind of erasure, and not only in the States, not only with Black women, but just globally, and I just felt like this kind of matriarchal history that was happening and had purpose for molding so many institutions, this country, different spaces, different ideas. They didn't really care to be acknowledged. They were just being. And so, yeah, I just thought that they were just kind of like artists do, is that you're interested in subjects that not only move you, but also things that are invisible to others. That's to me what artists are supposed to do, And so, actually I worked for several decades with these women, like photographing and painting or doing different projects, but I got so much criticism for doing it, and until I started incorporating my sculptures more and more. And so the sculptures basically not only became this kind of way that for me to interact with the person that I was photographing, like for us to have this kind of dialogue, but it also became this kind of transformation for kind of like resembling or tapping into this other realm, that I try to do in my work, and I see kind of like that people unconsciously, like when they see masks or headdresses, or it's something that is centuries old, and so
It really is.
yeah, so it it's something that's kind of unconscious, and it also kind of transcends, or it fights against a lot of the conditionings that we have, that is also kind of like this other communication through not only social media or public or art or printed matter, but just also this kind of generational narrative and history that where we think about value and what we value and what is relevant and what is to be seen and what is not only what is beauty, but even what is power.
Comes to power.
Yes, definitely.
And this is what I mean, like when you start talking to Jasmine, like there's like a whole dissertation.
Oh, please.
No, it's really, because I could unpack that when you talk about, there's so many things you just said that are really incredible. Like when you think about, when you take sexuality, which is not applied to other gender, like when it's not really put onto one man age, when you remove, like let's say, we're going to remove this idea of what is sexuality and being sensual, and look at these bodies as bodies of elders who have lived lives and are very powerful, as, these women have done so many incredible things. Even we talked a lot even about what activism is and what does it mean to change the way people see the world by your own life, by the way you act every day, rather than as a title or a noun, as a verb. But when you strip them away and you start looking at just the sheer power that comes with that, that's part of what's being made invisible. So when, as a woman ages and she's asked to cover herself or not be exposed or not, let's not look at that, let's not talk of that, power comes a lot into that.
Definitely.
About, when you become invisible, also what you've done becomes sort of left out of time, right out of the timeline. And a lot of the women that you've worked with, they are involved in, like we were saying with different, with the theater or with politics or with art in general, artists or in culture in some sense. That sort of power that comes through of living these incredible lives.
Definitely.
Gets, and I think it's, the instinct is to criticize if one is only looking from a sheer media sexual standpoint, like what does a woman look like as she ages? So yes, ageism plays into it, but on many different levels than what we're talking about as a superficial. It's a real deep-seated power in visibility. I'd like you to even just talk a little bit about, how these women who are these incredible women who have made so many massive, incredible changes in the world, whether it be in the arts, in politics, in social services, in daily lives of a community, how they themselves, it took years too for you to be able to make these photographs. I think time is really, we think about photography as being something immediate, but you really make it into something very performative over time. And I want to touch on performance and photography a little bit, but how many years before you were able to work, to actually, you were mentioning to me how many years it took with one of you, not just one, a couple of the women that you worked with. Could you speak to that a little?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or how it was for them themselves to be depicted in the work.
Well, that's the thing, is that all the work in this show, with maybe the exception of one, all the pieces, they were created just last year during the residency. But at the same time, I was working with several people at the same time for some of them, over close to 20 years. And
20 years, that's amazing.
But you know what? It's also, I don't work in a very linear kind of, my mind doesn't work in that, so I do multiples at the same time. And so some of the models, or I don't want to even say models, or collaborators, like Dell, for instance, she is one of the oldest art dealers, and she just closed her gallery this month in Detroit. And she's 90. And she, when I photographed her and I did it nude, she was like, yes. And she actually exhibits like photographers, and that was like the space that I would go and see art. It was the first place that I had her art show. And
what was the name of her gallery?
Dale Pryor Gallery. And she's actually still curating, even though she had to close her gallery. And it was just, was just containing so, I just loved to sit with her, and we would just talk for like hours. And she just had so much history, that of just artists and stories. And how would I not be wanting to photograph her and be inspired, and she not to be my muse? And then at the same, but not only that, she, at the same time, each one of them would give me something. And like, for her, it was very precious, because she was just like, look, not even my children have seen my breasts, and she really thinks that my photography is very abstract. And so that was like her reasoning for like, okay, we're gonna do this, and I'm ready. And I was like, okay, and
I'm ready.
Yeah, she's like, I'm ready. But
for
literally, it took years for her to agree, because at first, but you have to understand is that it wasn't, I was also doing other projects like collecting pubic hair and making weavings with it, and they were just like, they allowed me to just be free, and it wasn't with any judgment, which I realize now
That's
that,
beautiful.
you know, a lot of people don't have that kind of freedom, like even just to be able to just say, hey, you know, community, and be like, okay, this is strange, but, you know, I'll do it. You know?
But they actually got it and supported, you know, like
They got it.
you know what I mean? Like you need that, that
Yes.
understanding of why.
Right.
You need the why. It can't just be okay.
Definitely.
Right? Like,
Oh, no, it was definitely like, and some people, they were not even in the continent. They were in, like, I went to Brazil, I was just like stalking this woman, like,
I
you know,
love that.
like
I can
drawing.
totally imagine it too. In the Jasmine way of stalking, sort of like being
Patient, but like,
being patient.
and it took, you know, like, it's also too, they have a different way of culturally of how they see their body and things like that, and but at the same time it was also healing. It's not like I arrived at this place or whatever. Like, I was also seeking certain questions even about my own kind of like imperfections, and how my own body was constantly changing, and how I didn't feel like, even though I was young, I didn't feel that like I didn't represent like the standard of beauty, you know, and I was like quite insecure, and even I was young, and you know, and then these women were just like, just thought they were just shit, and I was just like,
They're so powerful.
they're so powerful, like I want that, like
Yeah,
why
like,
wouldn't
that's
I?
awesome.
So like, yeah, I was really drawn, and then and it would be sometimes you have to be patient, you know, like with, to me, like I don't care whatever, if you are a photographer or whatever, you're a painter, whatever your subject is, if you're painting apples, you are still collaborating with whatever you're shooting. You know, even if it's plants, it's you didn't create those
That's
plants.
interesting.
You know, so
Yeah, that's true,
when
isn't it?
yeah, I really, whatever I'm shooting, like in where it's going to be placed, it all makes a difference. And what is in that frame, it makes a difference for you to bring in this platform. So when I was working with them, some of the women, I would say majority of the women, it's maybe except for Nefra, but majority of them were just like, are you crazy? Like, why would you want to shoot me? Or I would say majority of them were like, why? And then sometimes we would just talk about it. Because I would be like, you know, because I had so much criticism from people when I would exhibit my paintings that I was like, well, maybe this is really messed up. And then I would talk with the women, and we would go back and forth about it. And so I actually did not do nude, like anything, actually until my oldest subject was 104, where I wasn't even planning to shoot, and they were like, we were on the beach actually in Brazil, and they wanted to do a nude, like, you know, wanted me to shoot them nude, and I was like, we're gonna get arrested. Like, there's no way that, you know, we can do this, like, you know, they're like, those are thongs over there, like, you know.
But this is Brazil, where you would think kind of sort of, it's more free than the United States in terms of like beaches and what that means to be on the beach, and, you know, how you know, can.
Well, no, well, that's the point. It's like also, too, is I'm, of course, conditioned too, of everything. And it was actually the person I was like working with, my subject, and I wasn't even thinking, we were just kind of, you know, chilling, and I was helping them. They wanted to go swimming, and they were like, I want to feel the sun on my skin in the ocean, you know, for the last time. And you're probably the only one that's going to take me, like, you know, and
Think about how beautiful and profound that is. 104 and
well, they were
running
at that time 90. They were in their 93.
young.
93 at that time, and they were, and then
Think about how
I.
beautiful that is, that you want, you know, that physicality of life. Right?
Right. I mean, well, of
But you
course.
did end up taking photographs.
Well, I
right?
took a
But in
photograph,
bathing suits.
but it was in a bathing suit because I was. But at the same time, it really shook me up later because I was just like, wow, I just didn't allow this person. Like, I'm asking them to allow me to be fully expressive, but then I didn't allow, you know, them. And then it really kind of shifted everything for me. And it was just like, she really felt like she was just, you know, gorgeous, like this beckoning beauty out of the ocean.
And she was.
And she was. And so when I took the photograph, I was like, oh my God, this is like a crazy moment that I missed. And then I said, okay, let me, I would like to go further with it. Let me push it a little bit more and then let me add, like she was like, well, of course, like, I mean, she really, I mean, like, you know, this is, you know, special, like my body, and with the other models, or not models, but just collaborators over time, we started to reveal less and less, and it was really healing too, because some of them had such negative experiences with their body, and so it was like this kind of really sacred moment, because it's like this intimacy that you have between your daughter, like, you know what I mean, and the subject, it was like that, and mother, daughter, grandmother, like what you do when you're bathing or you're helping, you know, each other, or your daughter get dressed, or your mother get dressed, or your, you know, grandmother get dressed, and then you put it in a private, and like, you know, and I just felt like it was just something that I wanted to see in the world, that I wanted people to experience it, and there were countless reasons, you know, why we talked in Liberia, you know, with the war, and how the women literally stopped war with their bodies, and then, but then on the other side of this kind of, because they're perceived, if you see an older, you know, woman nude, that is like bad luck, and so I don't know, I just felt like the art world for me, or even things that I saw publicly in magazines and just printed images or social media, it started to go towards looking very much like advertisements, where the bodies were sexualized and used to sell, to sell things. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that I just wanted to do something different, of using like the body in this kind of very sacred and also sensual way, you know, of like some of our oldest, you know, members in our community, so.
And sensuality in that case really gets connected to the sensual, the tactile, the power that comes from the, you know, your body that you've lived in, and that you've created these incredible things in your life, lived in.
Definitely.
You know, and
definitely.
I feel like I have to introduce this other aspect, because it really makes me think about something that I really learned from you and really reset. Like when I was doing the show with Jasmine at Casita Maria, you know, she wanted a quote in her show that was, "Until the lion gets a historian, the hunter will always be the hero," a Yoruban saying. And that has stuck with me through so much, because I think it leads back into this. As much as artists, I feel, overall change the way we see the world, I get a lot of pushback when I say that, which I'm always quite surprised. Like, well, they don't change the world. Yes, they do, and they change the way we see the world. Because the way you see the world is not the way I would, and you'll open doors for me to see it differently. But I also think there's so much of the lion story. I think about every time I do something, am I telling the lion story, or am I telling the hunters? The one I've been conditioned to tell, and the one that's always told? Or am I looking at the real histories that are underlying that just aren't brought to the surface? And I think that's what these bodies contain too. These ancient, like you even named the show Casita Ancient Futures, and that really made me think about what are the things we carry, and I'd like you to speak a little bit to this, like this idea of a collective memory of things we carry in our bodies that go through time. And I think that does reveal itself with age. I mean, you had mentioned something like, Anya, could you talk a little bit about the collective and that idea of, you know, what we carry in our, the sensuality is really that collective, right?
I guess some people would like to say the collective unconscious, but I think it's more than that. And I feel like that is a way that, you know, just energy, you know, it never dies. And so I feel like
it really is energy, right? It doesn't die. It keeps continuing. And that's something I learned when we did the show together. In doing research, I kept going back to try to find, like, even one of the things that was really wonderful at Casita was the first time that you allowed your headdresses to be shown, rather than within a performative state, to have them shown actually as they are, outside of the video, outside of the photography. You know, and if we do, you know, we look back at history and what we consider, what we call primitive and what we call ancient, that is very driven by systemic and structural racism, who has power, who wants to move forward culture. But when you look back, it's not only just an unconscious collective, it's memories that get passed on. I mean, we look to Greek culture for a lot of the things we study, but in actuality, the Greeks went to Africa to learn. You had to learn I guess what would be considered an MFA degree at that time in the earliest parts of Africa. You studied 50 years before you were considered having any sort of degree. So maybe you didn't finish in your lifetime. And that's what, when the Greeks went there and learned and then came and brought that back, the Greek culture, Roman culture was dormant for many years, used this knowledge and then really had a rebirth of society, of culture, and then that isn't an unconscious. That gets brought into a consciousness, it's just not always linked back. I remember doing a lot of studying around what does headdress and dressing, and you were talking about theater, like how that, even in the earliest of humanities that come from Africa, the idea of putting onto yourself where you want to be or where you want to go is a tool, is now really part of psychology. They just released a whole psychological study, which is supposed to be new, that is that, you put things onto yourself where you want to become. So it's, like when you look at these headdresses and where they're coming from, and culture comes from the earliest human beings, which is Africa, the earliest cultures. So I love when you speak about the collectivity.
Definitely.
And I know we're sensitive for time, so I'm going to go to what I also think is really fascinating in your work, is we talked a lot about photography, and that, you have a very interdisciplinary practice. Jasmine does everything from, dance, theater, music, everything gets part of your work. This is one type of, one body of work, but you really do. So I'd like you to speak to two things. One is, like how you had spoken to me a little bit about how, and I do see a lot of theater and performance in your photography. It's almost like we think about photography as something that photographs the exterior, but your photos always seem like they're taken from the inside out. So if you could speak to how for you photography is like a performative, I think it's very fascinating to learn that. And then also, how you define the multiple mediums in your work.
Well, first we were talking about the kind of like multiplicity, I wanted to specifically with the layering,
Yes.
is that is kind of one of the aspects of this particular show, is that these pieces that you could actually touch and they have
And move through, right?
layer. But it's also that you'll never be able to see all the images, because you're never actually, there's so many printed images in the pieces that are tacked out that I know that you won't necessarily see them, but that is the point of it, is that you don't ever see, because that is, we're kind of like this container of just infinity in us.
That's beautiful.
You know what
So
I mean?
you never get it all. Like say that, like
No.
so you're never really getting the whole narrative,
never.
let's say.
And I don't necessarily always push the viewer. There's some pieces that are in the show, like the tin can in the back. I don't tell everyone. I want to see also kind of the performance of the viewer, like how they interact with the pieces. I love, it's like an experiment, and I get to see like, okay, would someone open up the can? Are they going to open it up? And it's also to play with this kind of art space too. And then in terms of your other question, where you were saying about, the mixed media, in school, that's what school, and I totally understand the function of, we were just talking about this, but getting students or whatever you're studying to focus on one medium. But I just think that like a lot of my work, it starts off from an idea, like things that just I just have to get out. And the medium, it really has to do with like the idea, like it's not that, like I'm thinking about like, even with the photography, I don't care about any categories or any genre, or I don't really, I'm just at a point where I don't really care about where it fits in, and I'm not trying to fit into a certain category, or I'm not interested in it to look like Target art, everything is kind of categorized and fit into this cubicle. It's impossible, it's ridiculous to even think that painting does it influence photography? Like halftones, and think about line and form. Of
That's so
course,
true.
or even lighting. Like, come on, like that's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. It's really ridiculous.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that's so smart. It
No,
really
I mean,
is.
it's
It
really
is.
ridiculous. And then also to think about architecture and sculpture doesn't relate to painting and photography. Duh, we hang things on the wall. Like, it's interacting with the space. Like, of course. And like, don't, and then also this is an art space. Like,
It's so true.
I want this art space to go beyond this space. So that's, and I'm thinking about how can I do that? How can I get people to have something that is repeated in this kind of unconscious way that they don't know? Like, basically the piece in the back, you could touch it. People are like, oh, I can touch it. I'm like, yeah, you can touch.
But that's a big deal. No, but that's a big deal. Touching that you can touch is a big deal.
Yeah, it is. But it came actually from someone touching a piece that they broke and they couldn't.
Casita Maria.
Yeah, well, it happened a lot. I'm not just
Because
that.
the kids
like,
couldn't resist. Like,
Well-
it's so juicy, delicious. They just
Well,
wanted.
I don't know what.
I had to control myself.
No, I don't. But I was like, you know what? I need to make things that people can touch. Like, and so like this woman, actually, she was a curator. And she was dancing with one of like my paintings and broke
That wasn't
it.
me.
Like,
That wasn't me. I
photos.
wasn't dancing with it.
And then I was like, oh my God,
It broke.
Yes, it was a photo. I was mixing photo, and so it like cracked and everything, and I was like, oh God. But it was hilarious at the same time, and I was like, okay, I want to make something that you could dance with, and then it's also, I want to play with like this, that the photo, because there's so many photos everywhere, and how we use photo, we use it for escapism. You can see it in people's apartments, and even even on
social
the
media,
train,
like
or
changing who you are.
yeah, it's just the way you use it. So I wanted to kind of play with that in even textile, and so I just don't. I wanted to create pieces that play also not only with drapery, and play with part like come off the wall, like I want something that's part painting, part sculpture, part photo, and something else, I mean, that's the whole
And it makes sense in your
point.
work because if you think about like how holistic your vision is, and by holistic I mean that how it really does touch on all the different aspects of being. Let's say mind, body, spirit. There's no one medium. And another thing I learned from you, and I have to say this because you never credit yourself how much you influence back the curators, the writers. A lot of times artists are, they don't realize how much what you do actually affects everything else around you and then beyond you. Is that, I had always said before I met Jasmine, like, you don't have to pick a medium. If your work is strong and your concepts are strong, what does it matter what medium? You can walk and that's your medium, and you will know that's you. And you are for me, the icon of that. Like, you can use any medium. Even when you do performance work, where you're choreographing a performance or it's not a direct related to a tactile, it's so you, because I think you have a very clear way, even if it's not a one medium way of seeing the world and changing the way we see the world, that it always comes through. And I think that's a really powerful lesson to take away today too, that it's always the artist's concept rather than the medium that matters. And I have to touch this because for me, I learned this about you. And anytime I learn something new about you, it's like, oh, now I've got to tell everybody. But, I had never, when I saw your work, I started thinking about it this way, but I hadn't really thought about photography as performative. I think about a lot of artworks, I think painting's very performative. It's so linked to the flesh for me. And, I think there's a lot of artists who have discussed that already, how, painting is so close to the flesh, but you really have this kinesthetic way of, like, can you talk, like, how is it performative for you? It could be performative for us in many different ways, but for you, personally, as an artist, how is photography performative? It's fascinating.
Well, first off, when I'm working with the models, I don't really consider them performing. I really consider them being, and we're just kind of in this presence, and then we're just like, it's almost like a performance, but it's not a performance for theater. It's like we're being in this space, and we're being kind of like this, like on this one, I was inspired
Yeah.
by these like water goddess, because I was working with all of these activists around water in Flint, and they were using my headdresses. But in terms of traditionally, in terms of the dark room, yes, I do like to move my photos, you know, like the whole taboo. I like to play with things that have movement and, you know, double exposure on top of double exposure.
And physically moving them too,
Yeah,
right?
physically.
Like physically like moving them.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, you know, I'm just curious of kind of, you know, just pushing, like, if someone says you can't do something, I wanna know why. Why can't you do it? Because, I don't know, like, that's just, you know, maybe it's from me working with children, I don't know, because they always ask, like, why can't you?
I know, it's
And I'm
true,
like,
you've been an educator for many years.
that's a good point, why can't you? Like, and so, I personally am, yeah, I was really influenced, especially from like the Bauhaus, like their surrealist photography, but I wanted to make my kind of version of it, you know, like through my kind of lens of, you know, a female gaze, like, you know, perspective.
And I think that really
Subject.
comes through when you look at the work. It's really nice. And at this point, I can keep asking questions. I have no problems. I got a list. But I want to also ask if there's anyone in the audience that has any questions. If you don't, that's okay. Because Jasmine will be here, and I don't know how much time we have, but you can also go. I know for me personally, I often won't ask a question in the audience, but then I'll track the artist in a corner and be like, hey, I have all these questions. But if there's anyone that has any questions, please ask. If not, I'll wrap up with one last question. But if there's anyone that we have time for a couple of questions, if anyone has, please. And please say your name too.
My name is Paula.
Hi, Paula.
Hi. I one time hear you a little bit talking about how you felt that these amazing people were in a place where you did not felt yet, and that you wish that you accomplished that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I remember feeling, it was not with me, it was a conversation with someone else, so I felt intrigued about that sentence that you said, because it inspired me a lot. So just a little bit more. If you want.
Oh, yeah, sure. With some of the I have to say is that majority of the women in this particular show, they're from 65 to 104. And I would say that in particular, one of my oldest kind of subjects, to put it in perspective, she was alive when Harriet Tubman died. So she's no longer here, but
At that time.
yeah, but at that time she was like a child, and so I was really drawn to that. She was a very dark complected woman. She was very short, and just knowing about colorism in not only my community, but just globally everywhere I go in the world. And then also about just systemic racism, and, you know, even magazines or printed matter that had black bodies on them, they were always kind of like lighter complected. And she was a short, stocky woman, you know, with, and she just thought she was the shit. And I really thought she was the shit too, and I think she's the shit. And not because she thinks that, but it's the difference when a certain type of confidence, when you're embodied, when you literally move things without question. She was able to just move in the world that the way that she saw herself. Other people saw her that way because she not only believed it, but it was in every pore of her body. And it's really quite miraculous, really, because like of so much conditioning that we have. First of all, just the presence of women, you know, and then, you know, to be like mature bodies and things like that. it's, yeah, it's like this tsunami, you know, this system, you know, of just ideal beauty and just the male, yes, it's unachievable, and also this male gaze of what is beauty, you know, what is important, what is valid, and yeah, and she went against that, and she really did not care. She really kind of like not only embodied that, but she was able to just move and navigate in the world. Like, she literally opened a bank on Saturday when it was closed. And she would do things.
How did she do that?
I don't know. Like, one time she was gonna be late on the plane, and she got the pilot to call me to let me know. And I'm just things that, yeah, but at the same
Like, just so, like, you know, just breaking all the rules of what is, like, expected, not expected.
yeah, but
What's allowed, what's not allowed.
Yeah,
I know that the pilot called you and said, sorry, the plane's gonna be a little
yeah,
late.
I didn't even
gotta
know
be
that
here."
the planes have phones, first of all, like, and I mean, that was just a few. I mean, there's so many, but it's just that there are
That's
these
so
rare exceptions of people that she had a 6th grade education. And there's so many people that are in these grassroots organizations, or even when you think of the Guggenheim or some of these art institutions that we are, and you know, and there's be so many women that are behind them, but they're completely invisible, and just like they're just divas, like, and you know, I mean, even Baxter Street, like, really, you know, the women that run it, to be honest. So I just,
That's right.
yeah. I mean, there are just so many, and at the same time, is that I'll see, like, there'll be these same women that if someone in their community that's a male that, you know, was unfairly imprisoned or killed, they'll be out there protesting, but then there's this kind of invisibility when it's the other way, when there's women that are being kidnapped and being killed, and you know, so
Trafficked. And
right,
just
trafficked.
sort of pushed
Yes,
into the-
it's completely, and you know, so I just felt like at the same time, especially during this time, that you know, yeah, I needed to, I needed to like make this work, and I had so many kind of people, even while I was just making the work, they were just like, no one wants to see, you know, some old naked droopy women, you know, whatever. And then that actually gave me energy. I'm gonna prove you wrong. Actually, I'm gonna make you think about differently, like where you come from, you know, and I you know, it gave me more fire. And like, but really that was also kind of like the conjuring up that happened when, just from years of just working with kind of these trailblazers that, yeah, I mean, that were just doing just these miraculous things, like this art director. I mean, this woman, Adele, who was one of the oldest art directors in Detroit, she's not even the oldest, she's 90. You just closed her gallery, but she's still curated. It's actually another African-American woman that was older than her, you know, that is
gallery as well.
in Detroit, yes, but this is during, they were sustained during probably this the most like economic crisis. They survived, you know what I mean? Which is, and actually,
Speaks to brilliance.
yeah, and actually, so it's just, yeah, it's just so much. We just haven't touched on it.
And it opens doors to intimacy, right? Because when you think about, you know, I know even for myself, like when I think about older bodies, it's you're a boy lad, it's your mother, and then that becomes a very intimate space.
Mhm.
But we don't always treat other women that don't have that intimate space with us that way. But I think this work does speak to that. Like you had mentioned to me last night, which is another thing I didn't know, that when women see this work, they get uncomfortable.
Oh yeah,
And
very
then
uncomfortable.
could you speak to that a little? But it also then opens a door after like the initial. Could you talk about the initial reaction and then what they say to you later after they've thought? Could you talk about that?
No, it was definitely.
Because that's a door open.
It is. I mean, it's definitely been some criticism, and then, you know, later on, I feel like it's been healing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that it is something that the way that we not only see time on our bodies, you know, because we're all aging. We all are conditioned in a certain way of, you know, trying to, you know, to look 18 or, you know, puberty or whatever. And yeah, we're all kind of, you know, healing. And I mean, we can appreciate 100-year-old trees and, you know, the oldest living, you know, things on the planet, but then we don't, you know, treasure, like, you know, our elders, you know, and have them beat up on the train and take video of it. Like, it's very bizarre. You know?
And we talked about that too, how that too is a tool of not only structural racism, but patriarchy.
Definitely.
Like, the more you can make something invisible that's powerful, the more you can take away that power, the less influence it'll have on society.
Definitely.
Right? I mean, so the more you pull that away.
That was your profound thoughts. Yes, actually.
But I
Yes,
think that comes
about
through.
patriarchy.
Like, when you look at these women, you think power, you think strength, you think, wow, like these women that changed the world. And then the fact that you can touch it is a very big deal.
Definitely.
So, are there any? Yeah.
I think one of the things that, to me, when I was working with you on how this show came together, it was similar to the way that you talk about it, right? When we were trying to articulate it into even the press release, you were struggling with putting words around it, and there's this cacophony of sort of the struggle of what it means to be in that elderly state. And one of the things that I've not heard you talk about in all of the time we work together is the actual fear that the viewer perhaps
Definitely.
has, and how that confrontation, how you're confronting the viewer with that fear.
Right.
We talk about the suppression and the patriarchy, which is clearly valid in all of the work, but there is potentially that fear that you're presenting them with this idea of presenting them with an older body.
And it speaks to, like, remember you had mentioned last night that it's very true about how you said, even, because I thought mostly it would be
Which is the
men
opposite
which
of
would
power.
be uncomfortable. Yeah, it's the vulnerability, right? The feeling of disempowerment.
Right.
You were saying that sometimes women have come into the show or seen your work and been very upset by it. And but then later have come back to you. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, why did they say they were upset about it? And that, was it the feeling of fear? Was it the feeling of feeling confronted by something they weren't ready to look at, or more?
Well, I think also we all kind of conditioned to think that when we're older or something that is aging, that is connected to death, which is completely ridiculous. Actually,
Right.
you know, actually where I'm from, most of the people that I grew up with
That's
are dead.
interesting.
You know, they didn't make it till 30. So it's really kind of miraculous for someone to me to even make it to 100 or 80 or 70. And especially those statistics change depending on, you know, marginalized communities. So yeah, definitely I also think it's also a really, I was really deeply inspired by Wabi-Sabi, which is a completely different way of thinking in terms of aesthetics of beauty and the beauty of things that are impermanent. So, I mean, when we look at structural racism, we should think that is something that leads to death, you know, because that is what leads to death, or the way that, you know, not having access to healthy vegetables and processed food leads to death, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's all part of, like, the conditioning and, you know, I think capitalism and of selling products and, you know, of sex sells, and, you know, so when you think of fertility and things like that. But even though the seniors that I work with are the horniest group of people I ever, like, in my life, corporate, well, they say that as you get older, like, you feel things deeply, like, more. So I don't know if it's real. I'm
Feeling things deeply,
like
feeling
more,
things deeply, that's good.
but, like, you know, yeah.
But it makes sense, because you also don't have to, like, really worry about a lot of the fears that come, right? Because again, it comes back to fear, like the things that stop you.
Well, when I was here during the opening, and when I saw people not, excuse me, not just touch the paintings, but go through the layers, there was that kind of tension and fear in my body. It's like, why are they touching that? You know, because I didn't know that's what you wanted at the time. But the fact that people can touch and go through the layers, I think speaks to that fear that is underlying, but you don't really know it's there until somebody touches the painting and then the fear comes
And
out.
brings it through.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with an elderly body.
Oh, that's
So I really appreciate that connection between, you know, touching, you know, one's body that you may be dissatisfied with, and then touching something that's supposed to be so precious, like these layers of
That's
painting.
That's so
Yeah, that's a good way
beautiful.
of thinking
So-
about it,
Yeah, that is
So
so
I was standing here
beautiful.
during the opening in that kind of like Parasite film tension. Why are they touching?
So fabulous.
Why are they touching?
No, but then again, it's another breakthrough to fear. Like, so one level of, like, it's when, this is what I was hoping that you talk a little bit about onions. There's layers and layers and layers to this world. Just like there's layers of the epidermis, there's layers of art, the art canon of art. You know, there's, even when we think about the canon, I've been hesitant to ever even bring that up because I think this work has so much in it. But there are layers of that. There's layers of art history, there's layers of history, there's layers of fears that come through, and layers of fears that have sort of been structured by this, whether it be the art world or the society world, the cultural world, what you touch, what you don't touch. But you have this beautiful way, an organic way of using all of these tools, like from multiple entry points. So maybe the point for you was like, wait, why are these being touched? And then that opens up a fear to, or at least an understanding to, what are these bodies? And but then I never made that connection between that, and I think that's really beautiful, this idea of touching something that already feels so removed by many things, but by sort of breaking that one place of being able to touch, you break through to other places of touching. And I think that's something you do very instinctual in your work. And I know you think about it too, but it comes out on a lot of levels. It's really amazing. Are there any other questions for? Oh. Could you say your name too?
Yeah, sure. I'm James.
Hi, James.
So, looking at the work, it feels like there's this fear of being forgotten, and also the thing that I've noticed, like at the opening and even tonight, is this feeling that when you're moved by something, you have this instinct to photograph it, kind of, and sort of archive it for yourself. So I'm curious about what you think about when your work is documented onto people's personal archives and then placed upon feeds, and perhaps the flattening of the meaning being placed upon other things outside of the gallery context.
I look at all work that is something, I look at them as living in a sense, like, it's almost like if canvas had a soul. And I do think at the same time, as me as an artist, that it is my priority, like, okay, I'm stopping, but it was a question that one of my professors said when I was in grad school, and I was just so offended by it, but I keep thinking about it over and over. It's like, why would we care? And that is a really valid question, is that because everyone has their story, everyone has these lenses, everyone has something to say that is important and that is precious. And so the way that that I'm making certain decisions and I'm thinking about, you know, all of those things, I'm really thinking about how actually can I get someone who doesn't care to care, you know what I mean? And yeah, you know, like, so actually a lot of like my lighting, I'm highly influenced from cinema, you know, the use of red, and the use of red and how red kind of signifies in different parts of the world depending on who uses it. And so how can I use red in a way that people will understand how I'm using it? So I think that actually I wanted to do those because I think people don't care. I think I wanted to, yeah, most people, that what I see in, you know, just the art canon or art history or whatever is, you know, they're, most of the time, yeah, there are things that, I feel like at the same time that my subject is something that is, and even from a lot of my subjects, they feel that they're invisible, you know, that they don't, you know, that no one really sees them after a certain age, over and over and over, that's the same. And actually men who models that I have photographed, they have a completely different narrative, but specifically women, they say it doesn't make a difference from where they are in the world. After a certain age, they do not feel visible anymore. And I was just like, okay, how can I make something that doesn't matter, you know? And so, and I don't care if it's social media, it's whatever screen that gets it out there that someone sees it, and maybe it's not, I'm not a purist, like it doesn't have to be exactly the way I ideally see it. No, it's all an experiment anyway, you know?
But I think that's a line that you always cross over back and forth in a lot of your work between the dichotomies of things. You exist a lot in experimental gray areas, let's say, and I think this is another one, this idea of allegory versus archive. So there are allegories and there are stories that we tell, the oral histories that we tell each other, the stories that come out of the work, the stories we're telling now, and then the archiving, which is canon. It could be anywhere from very important, like the archiving of documentation within society, to social media and on cell phones. But I think because of the way you approach your work, it's not so easy, because I think even when I see these works on social media, those allegories still come through. And then in the other way around too, within the allegories it's an archiving of your experience. So that's a very beautiful way to put it, that even when you're talking about the invisible visible, I think you always sort of go between what people think are the extreme dichotomies, how always come together with you. I think that's a very powerful place to be too. Because you're awesome. I think that's, you know, a good place. Any other questions?
I think.
Are we good?
I think we have to wrap it up, but you.
And I got through without even a snore, not even one.
Thank you
For me.
You know, you can feel free, we're going to be wrapping up, you can feel free to come up and chat with these ladies, and thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Jasmine.